Pros. Despite decades of studies and proposals, Canada has not successfully implemented high-speed rail in the Quebec City Windsor Corridor. Instead, it has relied on incremental improvements to conventional rail services. The current high-frequency rail project may improve travel times and reliability, but without full electrification and true high-speed technology, it falls short of what other countries have achieved. Whether Canada will eventually commit to a full HSR system remains uncertain, but based on its history, skepticism is warranted. Canada has long considered high-speed rail in the Quebec City-Windsor corridor, but past efforts have largely resulted in studies, proposals, and political debates rather than actual construction. The corridor, which includes major cities like Quebec City, Montreal, Ottawa, Toronto, and Windsor, represents the most densely populated and economically significant region of Canada, making it the most viable candidate for HSR in the country. However, despite decades of discussions, Canada has failed to implement high-speed rail in this corridor, primarily due to political, financial, and logistical challenges. The idea of HSR in the Quebec City-Windsor corridor dates back to at least the 19th when both government and private entities examined the feasibility of faster rail travel. The oil crisis of the 1970s and the success of France's TGV and Japan's Shinkansen fueled interest in Canada. The high capital costs and a lack of political commitment prevented progress. In the 1980s and 1990s, several studies examined potential HSR projects, including a 1991 joint study by Via Railbahn and SNC-Lavalin that suggested an electrified rail line could significantly cut travel times between major cities. The study proposed a $6 billion investment, equivalent to over $10 billion today, but it never materialized due to a lack of funding. In the early 2000s, Canada revisited HSR discussions multiple times. A major 2011 study commissioned by the Ontario and Quebec governments proposed a 300 km/h electric train between Windsor and Quebec City at an estimated cost of $20 billion. Despite strong economic justifications, political uncertainty and changing government priorities led to the project being shelved. During this time, Canada continued to lag behind countries like France, Germany, and even the US, which has struggled with HSR but still made some progress in states like California. Instead of high-speed rail, Canada continued to rely on Via Rail's conventional trains, which operate at much lower speeds, maxing out at 160 km/h in some areas, but often slower due to shared tracks with freight trains. In the 2020s, Canada finally made moves toward improving passenger rail in the corridor, but not with true Instead, the federal government announced plans for a high-frequency rail project. This plan, which is still in the early planning stages, aims to create a dedicated passenger rail network between Quebec City and Toronto. While HFR would improve travel times and reliability, it is not true high-speed rail, as it would only operate at speeds between 160 and 200 km/h, still significantly slower than HSR systems in Europe or Asia. Several factors have contributed to Canada's inability to implement high-speed rail in the Quebec City-Windsor corridor. High costs. HSR projects require tens of billions of dollars in investment, and Canadian governments have been hesitant to commit. Political changes. Different governments have had different priorities, and long-term projects like HSR often get shelved when political leadership changes. Freight rail dominance. Much of Canada's existing rail infrastructure is controlled by freight companies like CN, making it difficult to integrate passenger-focused high-speed rail. Low population density. While the corridor is Canada's most populated region, it still has fewer people per kilometer than many European or Asian countries that have successfully implemented DrakeMeos are coming to critique.